Welcome to the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for obesity medicine news with your host, man on the pen, Dave Knapp. Welcome to the Tuesday, June 17th edition of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Manjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Manjaro, Zepbound compound. That is what we talk about each and every week here on the podcast. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to the new studio. We are getting so close to having this thing fully put together, but hopefully you can appreciate the touches that we've added already if you're watching over on YouTube, where you can always catch the video edition of this podcast. We're getting so close. And so thank you for being a part of building something special, the first and only patient-centric obesity medicine news platform that brings you breaking news in the world of obesity medicine. And I can think of no greater news to share to you today as the community leader here at On the Pen. It finally happened. It happened yesterday after 2 years of videos and posts and graphics, interviews, hashtags that turned into a movement. Eli Lilly has finally done what we've been asking for. The 12.5 and the 15 milligram vials of Zepbound are being released starting July 7th. Providers can prescribe these high doses in vial form through Lilly Direct. That's any primary care doctor can prescribe the Zepbound vials through Lilly Direct, and the shipments of those higher doses will begin in early August. So every dose from the 2.5 all the way up to the 15 will be available for $499 a month if you're on the starter dose 2.5, even lower yet, $349 to start. This is what we meant by release the vials. This is what we meant. For the first time, there's predictable access to every strength of Zepbound without insurance. No coupons, no backdoor codes, no single-use miracles, just access to the Zepbound vials, and not just the baby doses anymore, right? The big boy doses all the way up to 15 milligrams. So we've got the strongest ones. Listen, I think that this is just a huge testament to what the community can do. When we band together, we have a mission, and now our mission turns to that of affordability to these medications. And I really feel like with Lilly's release of the vials, the fact that they released the vials so much cheaper than Novo was charging for Wegovy, I really feel like it's Novo's move. I feel like this move that they made to help people who were moving off of compound semaglutide to the branded versions of Wegovy for $199 for people who are just starting in the month of June. That just needs to be cemented. It's a $199 medication, in my opinion, when you compare it to Zepbound, which in both clinical trials and now post-marketing trials has been proven to not only be better tolerated, but much more effective when we're talking in terms of weight reduction and weight management. So if you can get Zepbound for $499 a month, we should be able to expect that Novo brings down the cost for good of Wegovy. But I do want to point out something that is a huge caveat with these medications and with the vials specifically through Lilly Direct, and that is that you have to refill your medication within 45 days. Otherwise, the price jumps, and quite significantly. If you're on that 15 milligram dose, that jump, if you don't refill in 45 days, could send you past $1,000 out of pocket. At that point, of course, most people would just switch to the pens and use the savings card, but it's pretty wild. So that's sort of their mechanism that they have in place to make sure people aren't splitting the single-use vials. But we're not done. There's no victory lap being taken here at On the Pen per se. I mean, this is something that needed to happen for a long time. But until we get PBMs out of the way, until we have affordable access to branded medications for the people who need it, today is just another day to buckle down and to continue to work and to continue our advocacy efforts. we've been pouring many hours of time and many dollars of our resources towards the advocacy effort to really change things. And I've got some hopefully really awesome news to share with you in the coming weeks. We had a member of the OTP community who's actually been invited to sit in front of and sit on a panel with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. That, of course, because we shared stories. You shared your stories with On the Pen, and we passed those stories along. So I'm really excited to hear back on how that goes and to see if this person may ultimately be interested in conversing on camera to share about this. But that's just huge for the community and our advocacy efforts here. What we're doing, our tireless work is starting to pay off. And I just want to thank you all for being a part of it. Now that we got the release the vials out of the way, which is technically old news from yesterday, right? The news cycle ads goes so fast, not only in the big picture of news, but in this world here in obesity medicine, it's moving, it feels like faster and faster every week. Now let's talk about a big policy story that Big Pharma is already sharpening its knives over. We shared a video on this and we shared a Substack, so I'm not going to belabor it, but Bernie Sanders and Angus King, both senators, independent senators, have introduced a bill that would ban direct-to-consumer drug ads. So this is like no more people frolicking in the meadows while they're talking about having herpes. No more bedtime stories. Somebody reading their bedtime story to their kid and then talks about, explosive diarrhea side effects. We could get rid of those in the United States. The End Prescription Drug Ads Act would cut advertising across TV, radio, print, digital, and even social media. So if this passes, it would be seismic. Only 2 countries in the world allow this kind of advertising, us and New Zealand. And in 2024, Big Pharma spent over $5 billion on TV ads alone. And we kind of broke this down in that Substack article. But the interesting thing, or the gut punch, to all of this, is that we're charged the highest prices in the world. And we're sold this illusion that it was our idea to pay more for these wonderful medications while the rest of the world doesn't. Interesting, in the breaking news piece of this today is that the White House has actually announced that they are committed to working its own angle on this if legislation isn't passed. So if a congressional ad ban isn't passed, the administration is saying that they want to make it so expensive and so complicated to advertise direct to consumer that the drug companies would just stop voluntarily, meaning that they could have stricter side effect disclosures and kill the tax write-off for companies who enjoy that for their ad expenses. So just leveraging different powers that the government has on these pharmaceutical companies just to make it less appealing to run ads. So if you've got to sit there and talk about every single side effect that was observed in a clinical trial, you're going to have much more than 30 seconds or 45-second spot to do that. And so what would be the point even? Nobody would tune in. So this isn't just Bernie Sanders squawking anymore or RFK Jr. over on an island. This is now publicly supported by both parties. And we saw even earlier this month where Ro Khanna, a congressman out of California, introduced a bill to also codify Trump's executive order on international price benchmarks. And so you're seeing bipartisan efforts to really make an impact, hopefully for the betterment of patients everywhere. Now, I feel like the conversation, and we had a video on this the other day, so I won't belabor it, but I feel like the conversation around whether drug companies should be able to market and advertise is an interesting one to have, because I think there's a lot of people who feel in the community that they never would have even learned about treatments like GLP-1 medications for obesity or type 2 diabetes without the commercials. Like, who can imagine a world without the Ozempic jingle? You're singing it in your head right now. I know it, and you're welcome. So very interesting conversation, but definitely when you consider the billions of dollars that are spent on advertising and how annoying it is to watch the commercials, I don't know that it's a bad thing. So we'll have to see what happens. Both of these efforts to bring down costs and to reduce the direct consumer advertising have bipartisan support. So this isn't a partisan issue. It's issues that really impact patients that we could see meaningful action on in the coming days, weeks, and months. So make sure that you stay tuned to On the Pen. But let's talk about Amycretin. So earlier this week, we learned about the oral formulation. We got some top line data about the oral formulation of Amycretin. And we've been hearing whispers about the injectable data to come. We actually got some of this injectable data out ahead of the ADA conference. So this is breaking news. The injectable version of Amycretin, again, this is the next generation. So we got CagriSema, amylin, and GLP-1 coming from Novo Nordisk next year. But Amycretin is even farther on the horizon yet, a couple years out. We're going to get into a little bit later on how maybe it's not a couple years out. So very well, maybe not, but we may get it quicker than we thought. So we'll get into that later. So a reason to stay tuned to the end of the podcast here. But the injectable version hit up to 24.3% weight loss. And that was over a 36-week study. So you're talking about an injectable medication that eclipses the 72-week trial of Zepbound in just 36 weeks. So most of that weight loss happened even before that 36 weeks. So this is super interesting. That was at the 60 milligram dose. So a 60 milligram injectable dose of Amycretin. But interestingly, when you take the 60 milligram numbers and compare them to the 20 milligram numbers, which was the next dose down, the 60 milligram and 20 milligram doses weren't that different. And so, of course, with Novo Nordisk making moves with their clinical trials to reflect the real world a little bit more, we belabored that conversation on the CagriSema trials on this podcast. It will be very interesting to see what ultimate dose they land on because with a very little separation between 20 and 60 milligrams, my sense is the high dose of Amycretin would end up being 20 milligrams injectable or something between 10 and 20 milligrams injectable Amycretin. So that is super interesting. And the real win here is that Novo Nordisk got approval. We covered this last week to skip phase 2B trials and just go straight to phase 3. So early 2026, we're going to have phase 3 trials for both oral and injectable Amycretin. And as we talked about earlier, the oral version hit 11% weight loss in just 12 weeks, 11+% weight loss in just 12 weeks from an oral. We haven't seen numbers like that in any other oral formulation of anti-obesity medication, save for maybe the super high doses of Viking Therapeutics VK2735, which we talked about a bunch on the podcast here. But oral Amycretin has the ability to be an absolute game changer here and could reshape what we think the next few years of anti-obesity medicine could look like. Listen, the conversation here is going to shift hard to quality of weight loss because I do believe that the next generation of these anti-obesity medications really will move the needle even farther towards the ability to reduce weight problems. And then the question becomes, okay, when you're losing this much weight and you're losing it this rapidly, what percentage of muscle mass and lean mass tissue is being lost in addition to fat? And so the conversation will shift, and pharmaceutical companies have long seen this. That's why you see these monoclonal antibody studies being done with things like bimagrumab. I believe Regeneron has their own one with pairing it with semaglutide. So in the future, we're going to see weight loss with potentially improvement of muscle mass ratio. So we're just going to have to see how this all shakes out. But interestingly enough, there was a huge announcement today by the FDA, which is sort of breaking news. This is just literally before I got on the podcast to record today, which is why I'm recording a little bit later than we normally do. The FDA just announced it's going to launch a national priority review voucher program for phase 3 drugs. And this is incredible because we've already had priority review vouchers, sort of a similar system in place that reduce the time that the FDA looks at a medication from about 10 to 12 months down to 6 months. This priority review voucher that the FDA is launching, under this program, selected applicants could be reviewed in just 1 to 2 months instead of the standard 10 to 12. So that kind of acceleration could completely reshape the timeline for when we expect to get drugs like CagriSema next year, or forglipron, the oral small molecule from GLP-1 from Eli Lilly. Later on, Retatrutide. So we're talking about these blockbuster, game-changing, next-generation anti-obesity medications. We're talking about the potential to get them 4 or 5 months sooner than we once thought possible. So it all depends on how quickly the FDA rolls this out, and we don't have a ton of information on this right now. But the potential to get CagriSema, Retatrutide, or forglipron earlier than we thought via this FDA priority review program could be very, very intriguing. We'll be watching it closely because if Novo or Lilly secures one of these vouchers, it's going to be a massive game changer for those who don't respond to the current treatments and just for more options to be out there. So I want to shift to talking about something serious, and something that, I try not to be an alarmist on the podcast here. I try not to be obnoxiously filling people with unnecessary worry, but there's something that's been going on that demands that I'm saying something about it. And I just feel like we've got to beat the drum on this thing because we need answers. We need clarity because I think it has the potential to become a huge problem. So here's what's going on. I'm getting messages on a weekly basis from people who are in the community. And this has proliferated largely on TikTok, but it's gone into the whole GLP-1 community. Once the shortages were ended and the 503B compounds were removed from the shortage list and doubled down on by the court in Texas, the arguably safest options, most widely available options, and closest to the brand name medication options went away. And you would think that the majority of people just went to maybe 503A options or revisited the branded medications through their insurance. That is not what happened. There has been a mass exodus from the compounds which were overseen by doctors, which had FDA oversight at the 503B level, and then state pharmacy board regulations and oversight at the state level for the 503A pharmacies. Listen, people went immediately and in massive numbers to the gray market. Now, if you're not familiar with the gray market, I'm not going to spend a lot of time educating you on it because I think this is a problem in certain aspects. And so I want to talk about something in particular that I just want to flag because nobody else is talking about it. And I feel like if we don't, people may continue on and there is potential, I believe, here for people to be harmed. So here's what's going on. And we've been talking about this for a long time on this podcast. I mean, people are responding to the content that I'm putting out in videos and saying, you have some sort of financial interest in this, saying this, blah, blah. No, I don't. I've been very consistent on research grade peptides for a long time. I just think for somebody with a platform my size, knowing that people can barely get compounded medications and dose it correctly with doctor supervision, with paperwork from pharmacies, I just know that it would be highly irresponsible for me to push people in this direction because if you think there's nuance with compounds, and there is, and very few people even understand the difference, there's exponentially larger amount of nuance in the research grade world and much more stuff that people have to wade through to find safe options or safer options. So here's what's happening. People are injecting research grade Cagrilintide or Cagrilintide. They're injecting Retatrutide. They didn't leave semaglutide or tirzepatide for research grade tirzepatide or research grade semaglutide. Many people went right to the next generation of drugs. And I want to flag something about Cagrilintide specifically. If you're a follower on my Substack, you got this in your email this morning. But mixing Cagrilintide with bacteriostatic water and hoping that it just mimics Novo Nordisk's CagriSema, which is, again, we're expecting it to hit the market early next year, is risky, and people are stacking it. Some research grade companies are offering a cagrilintide, semaglutide mix. Some people are offering it straight cagrilintide, and many people are just combining it with their tirzepatide, whether they're getting compounded or whether they're getting branded medication. They're just sort of taking it off label as just a normal peptide. But there is inherent risk with amylin agonists, and it's a specific risk that doesn't exist as uniquely with other peptides, because amylin, the hormone in our body, and that's the hormone that cagrilintide mimics, can form something called amyloid fibers, basically like a clumping together and folding of the peptide. This is something that can happen naturally with your natural hormone, basically long, sticky, and toxic protein strands that are linked to conditions like Alzheimer's, diabetes, organ damage. Once they form, you can't undo them. And if you mix raw cagrilintide with just backwater and inject it, especially without a stabilizer, you're taking a huge risk that this could cause issues for you, unpredictable issues for you, because we don't have long-term studies that track what happens when people take unstable amyloid receptor agonists, which is why Novo Nordisk has spent millions and millions of dollars in clinical trials and actually have a injector pen that is dual chambered. So their late stage phase 3 clinical trials keep cagrilintide and semaglutide in separate chambers. So we've talked about this many times on the podcast. Because they have to be held at different pH levels. Otherwise, you risk that folding of the peptide, the degradation of cagrilintide. So they have to be held separately, right? And people think, well, Novo mixes these two, so it must be safe for me to do it. But Novo has these different solvents and these injector pens that keep them separate. Now, in fairness, they do have a phase 1 trial. We covered this back in December. They do have a phase 1 trial that is testing a true co-formulation of these two. But the one that'll hit the market is in a dual chambered pen. They require different pHs, different stability requirements. So this isn't just powder and water. This is advanced pharmaceutical chemistry. And so you need to ask yourself, if backwater was enough, why isn't Novo already just mixing the two together? Why is their new phase 1 version that they've come up with considered a scientific breakthrough? So this is risk masquerading as convenience, and nobody's talking about it. So we're talking about it here. And I think that people need to be aware that there is inherent risk with amylin receptor agonists. And that's why the pharmaceutical companies run these trials and spend millions and millions of dollars to make sure that the formulation is exactly how it is. And when you order research grade, you just don't know what you're getting. So I want to just throw a special caution out there about cagrilintide, the research grade version, because I know a ton of people are taking this stuff. And, I'll just take a moment to pause and say, because of the feedback that I've gotten on this, people think that I hate the research grade community. That I dislike people that use these. No, I have spent the last 2.5 years of my life. I've spent thousands and thousands of my own dollars to advocate for greater accessibility to the safest version of these medications that are out there. I want you to think about that for a minute. That's not the heart posture of somebody who doesn't care or is heartless about people that can't access these medications. I think it's important to understand that even though I've had comparatively easy access to GLP-1s, it's because I live with multiple comorbidities. I live with sleep apnea. I live with obesity. I live with type 2 diabetes. I live with hypertension. I live with all these things that statistically will end my life shorter than the average person. And so while I do consider myself blessed to have had access to this, I do understand that that is not everyone's situation. And so I've fought and advocated for and given a great deal of my life to make sure that people have access to safe, affordable medication. So shame on anyone who is questioning my motives here. I find it funny that people can purchase research grade chemicals on TikTok and never question the financial incentives of the people who are educating them on that. But the second I make content that flags something that I feel like is a considerable risk that people are taking that they may not know about or understand, and to have my motives checked on that are just, it's wild. And the types of things that make it very frustrating sometimes to advocate for people who just have no idea what you've given to make their situation better. So I realize that this isn't a pity party podcast, but this stuff is what needs to be said. And I felt like it needed to be addressed on today's podcast. I want to thank you all for joining this week. I want to thank you for being the best part of what we do here at On the Pen. I want to also thank the sponsors of On the Pen. Row is the sponsor that helps us bring this to you every week, helps us have a nice studio that I can have outside of my home to create this podcast and to bring the news to you. Row has a program called the Row Body Program. Listen, if you are facing affordability issues, access issues, you got to check out the Row Body Program. Patients that are from the On the Pen community who are using the Row Body Program are finding a renewed success in getting covered their branded medications, because Row is really, really good at fighting those insurance battles, knowing what to say. Listen, they do it thousands of times a week. And so they know what needs to be done and what needs to be said. So check them out. Row Body, you visit row.co/OTP to learn more about the Row Body program, where patients lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year when coupled with lifestyle modifications and the medications, when appropriately prescribed, for people who are dealing with chronic disease. I think that it is very important that if you're going to start any medication, you familiarize yourself with what the potential risks are. Of course, all of that is available on Row's website. So visit row.co/OTP to learn more about the Row Body program. And I hope that you will give them some love for supporting the work that we do and the information that we bring. If you found the information that we bring to you valuable, I hope that you'll consider subscribing to our Substack. You can go to onthepen.substack.com and you can subscribe there for free. You'll get all of our news delivered directly to your inbox each and every day. For the paid members who want to support financially the work that we do here so that we can continue to grow this and continue to have our own thing, patient-centric obesity medicine news platform, you can do that by becoming a paid member. If you're a member on YouTube, we launched a special link for you to get 50% off the annual membership. You can get access to that by sending me an email to david@onthepen.com. One last thing before I cut you loose. We are awaiting press credentials for the American Diabetes Association show this upcoming weekend in Chicago. I do plan on attending that if all goes according to plan. Health is doing better. We are going to have a ton of news to report. It's going to be a massive week. So I hope you'll join us for the content there. You can do that best by subscribing to our YouTube channel or to our Substack, where we're going to bring you all the latest breaking news that comes out. It's going to be probably the biggest week in obesity medicine news for the entire year. So make sure that you subscribe. If you're on the podcast, give us a 5-star rating and review. Do all the things that train the algorithm to put us in your feed. And until next time, thank you for being the best part of what we do. And we will catch you on the next one.